Imagine being able to build an app with your name on it.
The Black Underground Railroad that led into Mexico. We had never heard about that before.
Yeah, not many people have.
But whoa, like, what you know about this Underground Railroad? What's going on? Black indigenous people moving to Mexico. What is this?
I know, it's a lot. That's what I always tell you. It's a lot of story. You know, the way that our elders began the story was that in the late 1600s, around 1680s, into the early 1690s, there were what would become known as the Gullahs, but they were enslaved Africans living in the Low Country who took it upon themselves to seek their own freedom. So instead of going north, they went south into Florida because Florida at that time was a Spanish territory, so it was not part of the formation of the U.S. at that point. It was owned by the Spanish.
In 1687, 8 men, 2 women, and a nursing child escaped from Carolina to Spanish St. Augustine and requested baptism into the true faith. Florida's governor sheltered the runaways out of Christian obligation and refused to return them when an agent from Carolina came to reclaim them. The Slaves' Telegraph quickly reported this outcome, and soon other runaways began arriving in St. Augustine. Florida officials repeatedly solicited Spain for guidance, and finally, on November 7th, 1693, Charles II issued a royal proclamation
giving liberty to all, the men as well as the women, so that by their example and by my liberty, others will do the same.
Fort Jose was established freedom seekers who were making their way down from the Carolinas, escaping slavery. If they made it down to Spanish Florida, they could live free.
And once
see, and when you look at that history, if you look at what he said, hang on, 8 of them went, all right, they heard about Florida, they made it through, to Florida, and then basically people started to hear about these people who were Jake's Israelites, who escaped to Florida, all right, and that's something that you call, what's it called, remember that song by, I think it's Marvin Gaye, I Heard It Through the Grapevine, all right, well, if you Google it, right, I heard it through the grapevine, all right, the phrase, I heard it through the grapevine, relates to slavery as grapevine telegraph, was a vital clandestine communication network used by enslaved people, Israelites, in American South to share news and information, all right, when other forms of communication were restricted by slaveholders. So the way they actually started to find out that, listen, if they can get to Florida, they'll be free, all right, they heard it, what? Through the grapevine, all right? That's where that phrase comes from. Let's keep going.
Once they got there, they found that there were already people there who were living free. There were formerly enslaved Africans, there were free blacks who were living on the land.
At Nero's town on the Swanee River. Here on the Apalachicola River, even before the one here at Prospect Bluff, you had a settlement near Cheesy Bluff. They established a separate one where there were several hundred Maroon fighters. You had many settlements of free blacks all through Florida, particularly, late 1700s, early 1800s.
There were also Native Americans. At the same time that was happening, there was the group of Creeks who lived just north of Florida. And because of moral differences, they splintered into the Upper Creeks and Lower Creeks. And the Upper Creeks decided that they wanted to break away and go down into Florida to get away from the Lower Creeks, who were taking on more European ways of life. And one of those was to begin chattel slavery. That's where the idea of the word Seminole comes from, is that some linguists believe that it is a Creek word or a Muskogee word, and it's pronounced Shiminole or Seminole. They believe it means runaway because these Creeks believed that part of their group was running away. And so it's also interesting that it fits for what would become the Black Seminoles because they were essentially running away as well. They formed.
Yeah, that running away. Now remember, we went to Genesis, right? remember it said that Reuben is what? Genesis 49, verse 4. Reuben, it's about Reuben, unstable as water. Alright? Thou shalt not excel, unstable as water. Alright? Always moving from one place to another. Alright? And the word Seminole means what? Runaway. Alright? So that's prophecy in the making. If you're running away from something, you are unstable as water. You're not fixed in one place. You're unstable as water. So, this is prophecy in the making. Alright? Let's keep going.
Their own villages, but were interacting with the Seminoles, so they would become known as the Black Seminoles.
The African and indigenous people lived and worked closely together. And in time, they came to view themselves as a part of the same loosely organized tribe, cultivating a mutual respect of each other's cultures. The Africans adopted a lot of the Indian garb.
Hello everyone, welcome to my video ad.
And the Indians adopted African agriculture, music, and folklore. And they lived this way for over 100 years, raising generations of children in freedom. As Florida continued to be a haven for Black freedom, this didn't set too well with antebellum Georgia. They shared a border, and contentions were high. At this point, there was a lot of retaliation going on. The U.S. military launched raids, tried to steal slaves, steal cattle, and encroach on this Spanish land.
The United States felt that the existence of this community served as something of a beacon of freedom for slaves from Georgia and the Carolinas, or even the Creek Nation, to slip away from bondage and come down here seeking freedom in Florida.
In the spring of 1818, the U.S. government launched their attack.
As soon as the U.S. military was dispatched at the orders of Andrew $20 Jackson, this marked the beginning of the First Seminole War.
The 1818 battle at Suwannee is again recorded by the U.S. military. The people referred to as Black warriors held off the U.S. troops.
The Seminoles, known as the Red Sticks in that area, and the Black Seminoles held their ground and held up their contract with the Spanish to defend the border.
They ultimately fell back, and the village was destroyed. Fell back to was the Manatee River, Tampa Bay, Angola.
At the conclusion of the First Seminole War, the Spanish sold Florida to the Americans for $5 million. This drove the Seminoles and the Black Seminoles deeper into Central Florida, deeper into the Everglades. It was here that the two bands grew closer, and it was also here that birthed two legendary leaders, Osceola for the Seminoles and John Horse, aka Abraham, to lead the Black Seminoles.
So the First Seminole War began between 1816 and 1817 when General Andrew Jackson went in and started a war.
I read somewhere that he was trying to recapture black formerly enslaved. They weren't even formerly enslaved at this period. They were never even
They
slaves,
were generations
right?
removed. Yeah, they were generations removed. And Andrew Jackson, he was the only president who ever ran on the idea of committing genocide. So he promised that he would wipe out, all Native Americans and return formerly enslaved Africans to their owners.
Wow, you see how wicked this guy is. Let's look at his work. And by the way, Andrew Jackson his nickname is the Indian Killer, man. Alright? And here's the article here. This is from ICTnews.org. Indian Killer Andrew Jackson's Indian Removal Act on display for the first time. Alright? So, just the big highlight from that is number one, the actual document that he signed. Alright, for the Indian Removal Act, they're putting it on display in some museum in Washington, D.C., which is a disgrace because they're celebrating genocide. Alright, but this guy's nickname was called the Indian Killer. He didn't believe in, just killing some and putting them on. He wanted to wipe them all out. And they put this cracker on their money. That clearly shows you that you're in your own land, man.
Andrew $20 Jackson was POTUS number 7. This wealthy Tennessee enslaver, known to be the poor white man's champion, with a base known for their riots and lynching, presidency full of scandal, he would be best known for his deep hatred of black people and Indians, promising to deal with the banks, restructure the government, and deal with the nagging Indian problem holding the country back.
The Indian problem. This was the name given to indigenous Americans just living their life on their land, but land that the colonial settlers wanted. They wanted to take their land, their joy, their happiness, but especially that land.
There's almost a mythology about this, that somehow when the Pilgrims arrived, they were dragging land behind them. There was no land brought here. The land here was Native nations. And this is what the United States needed. It's what it wanted. They wanted all of it. They wanted everything.
Between 1830 and 1850, about 100,000 Native Americans were evicted at gunpoint from their ancestral homelands. They were escorted by the United States military to designated Indian territory in present-day Oklahoma. The relocation, known as the Trail of Tears, was the result of genocidal legislation called the Indian Removal Act of 1830, signed into law by President Andrew Jackson. Hey, what's up, family? Hope you guys are enjoying this video, and if you are, please consider sharing this video.
See, he's a devil, Andrew Jackson, man. He's just another devil. He's just another devil, you know? Celebrating him like he's some hero, man. Yeah, it was a war of extermination. Alright? It was a war of extermination, man. And if it wasn't for the mercies of the Lord, they would have achieved it. You know? This is Micah 2 verse 1. Alright? Woe to them that deceive iniquity and work evil upon their beds. And that's what they were doing back then. And they're doing it now, man. When the morning is light, they practice it because it is in the power of their hand. Because the Lord gave them the power. The earth is given into what? The hand of the wicked. Okay? How did all these big companies in America emerge through? The genesis of it is to steal the land. If they didn't steal the land, you wouldn't have to have any a cracker business in America. They had to steal the lands. And because they're greedy and they're proud men, neither keep at home, enlarge their sight, and it says death. Alright? They'll do it by any means necessary, man. Alright? And you're seeing that in this history. Alright? Verse 2. And they covet fields and take them by violence. Like Andrew Jackson. Alright? And houses and take them away. So they oppress a man and his house, even a man and his heritage. Is that not what happened to tribe of Reuben, Seminole Indians? Alright? Tribe of Judah, those poor Jakes. Alright? Who were trying to find a place to stay. Okay? Did that not happen? It did happen, man. Alright? They covet fields to take them by violence. You know? Even a man and his heritage, they're doing it in someone else's land, man. Alright? That's why the Lord said what? His words were smoother than butter, but war was in his heart, man. You know? Let's continue here.
And within this time, the Seminoles and Black Seminoles have only gotten closer. The Black Seminoles are highly militarized, and so when the war does begin, they are out there on the front lines, so much so that General Jessup says, you know, this is not an Indian war, this is a Negro war, because they were at the front lines.
General Jessup wasn't wrong. It was a black war. It was a Negro war. It was the largest Negro uprising the United States had ever seen. And it's in no history books anywhere. More than 300 enslaved individuals rose up against their plantations and came to join arms with the Black Seminoles to fight against the United States of America and for freedom.
After the defeat of the First Seminole War, Andrew Jackson went on to become President of the United States of America, and he signed the Indian Removal Act. And his signing of this act, they knew that a war was coming, and they prepared accordingly.
John Horse and his compatriots gathered the troops together. They went around to the local plantations all throughout Florida, rallying up the enslaved and telling them that they can get their freedom, and they listened. At his call, they all came to fight against the United States government. They fought tooth and nail with everything that they had and launched a 7-year war that cost the United States government more than they had ever spent and more than they would spend ever until the Vietnam War. They caused more casualties and more damage than any other slave rebellion in U.S. history. So why haven't you heard about it?
The reason that they fought so hard and were known for fighting was because for the Seminoles, they would just die. But for the black Seminoles, they would be returned to slavery. So that was what they were fighting for and against. And so the thing was that they didn't just kill, they killed twice. You know, they wanted to make sure that their enemies were dead.
John Horse, being the excellent strategist and leader that he was, told the United States government that he would lay down his arms if and only if they would give them papers of emancipation for each and every one of his soldiers. And they agreed to this. So they put down their arms, and the black Seminoles began their trek on the Trail of Tears, headed to modern-day Oklahoma.
If your resume isn't...
See, the Bible says to never trust your enemy. You know? If they listened back then, oh my gosh. Let's continue anyway.
They lost lives as well, but I believe their disposition was a bit different from the other indigenous people that were on that trail. I believe that these Africans were looking forward to getting to that reserved place in modern-day Oklahoma. I believe they saw it as a new start and a new life that awaited them. But when they got there, they found old demons. They found broken promises. And they found that Uncle Sam is the same dirty uncle that he's always been.
But of course, everything changed by the time they got to Oklahoma.
This reservation wasn't their happily ever after, nor was it the end of their story. At this reservation, the U.S. Attorney General, Nathan Clifford, announced that the U.S. government didn't even have the authority to grant their freedom in the first place. In other words, their emancipation was essentially revoked.
Y'all, we have made it out here to the remotest of the...
See, you can't trust this devil, man. And by the way, if you look at the word emancipation, alright, and the word emancipation doesn't, sometimes it means to free, but if you look at it quite closely, again, it's showing you that this man's the devil. He's a sly, silver-tongued devil, alright? Because basically emancipation means what? Transfer of ownership, man. Alright? That's what it means. So he wasn't going to emancipate any of these slaves. Or, you know, former slaves or whatever. You know, as she said, they were going to kill the tribe of Reuben. And then, you know, the other Jakes that were with them, you know, they were put them back on the cotton field. So they fought hard, man. Alright? And they organized themselves, you know, etc. And that's something to be proud of. That's why you haven't heard of this that much. You know? There wasn't no big Navy ships coming to save. It was them, a few of them, that basically wanted to keep their freedom, man. Alright? And they came together and they fought their devil. Alright? And that's going to happen again. Alright? Especially with DJ Trump in the White House, man. All his things, he's, you know, saying, we're going to send martial law, National Guard into Washington, all that stuff. He's doing it in black cities. He's even saying that black mothers are calling him, saying, come to LA and Chicago. He's lying. Okay? And that's what they are. They're good liars. Just look up the word emancipation. No. While emancipation can involve the termination of ownership, like freeing an enslaved person, its core meaning is to free someone or something from restraint, control, or dependence. Alright, but listen very carefully. The word has its roots in the Latin. And who spoke Latin? The Edomites, man. Alright, the Romans, they spoke Latin. Alright, the word has its roots from Latin, emancipe, which combined ex, alright, out, and manipea, alright, means what? To transfer ownership. Alright, to transfer ownership. You see? So emancipation basically is to transfer ownership. And its roots is from what? The Latin language. Alright? And whose language was that? The so-called white man's language. That's why you look at, one of the brothers said that the other day, when I was going to sit down, Brother Caleb, he's saying that. He said, that's why when you watch the films at the end, you know, sometimes they got their different films like Superman or whatever, Superman 4 or 5, and it's in Roman numerals. Alright? It shows you who's ruling the world today. Alright? The so-called white man. Alright? So there's no such thing as he freed our people. Alright? They want credit for so-called freeing our people. Alright? But they did save in the first place. It's sick, man. Oh yeah, we're the one that freed the slaves. No, you didn't. You emancipated the slaves. You transferred them. That's what the Underground Railroad was about. Alright? Getting jakes from down south, alright, to go up north so they can work in factories for their new venture, which is the Industrial Revolution. Alright? Cheap labor. Alright? You'd rather be a slave or you'd rather be paid peanuts? The slave don't get paid nothing. Alright? At least you're working hard, yeah, but at least you're, you're getting paid peanuts. It's better than being a slave, though. That's the whole business of that Underground Railroad rubbish. Alright? And Masons were involved in that. Alright? And just like you saw in this history, they said we'll emancipate you, and then when it came time to do it, oh, we can't do it. He's the devil, man. You can't trust him.
Remote.
We are in El Nacimiento de los Negros.
Now, out here, these people are the people that never bow down. You guys, their history dates way back. From North Carolina down to Florida, from Florida to Oklahoma, and from Oklahoma walked all the way into Mexico, a 6-month hike.
And made it here to freedom in 1850.
The story goes a little something like this.
But for the Black Seminoles, they were threatened with being captured and returned to slavery because it was outlaw territory. And so there were slave catchers there who...
Anyone with African features were being kidnapped and sold off in the night.
So pretty quickly, John Horace started looking for a way out.
A group of Black Seminoles led by the Wildcats, who was like the chief of the Seminoles, and John Horace, who was essentially the chief of the Black Seminoles, made their way down to Mexico. Mexico had abolished slavery, and it was a dream of both John Horace and Wildcat to make it to freedom, to make it here to Mexico. They got here in 1850 and settled in this town in the state of Coahuila called El Nacimiento de los Negros.
My name is Corina Torralba Harrington. I was born in Nacimiento, Coahuila, Mexico, Comunidad Negros Mascogos, and I migrated to the United States when I was about 7 years old.
When they made it to Mexico, it was the land of milk and honey. They were greeted with open arms because Mexico had a problem. They had raiding parties. The Comanche and Apache tribes were raiding all along that Mexican border. Also, the Americans were encroaching, as they do, all along that border. So Mexico received them with open arms, as they did for every black self-emancipating individual.
It's shocking how much of the equipment we've used for
But for these people, they gave arms, they gave weapons, and land in the state of Coahuila, in a little city called Nacimiento.